A resource shared is a resource not wasted. Flexible resourcing by Neeraj Malhotra and James Gallagher, both of Roche, Welwyn Garden City, UK. Everyone has managed a project at one stage or another. Regardless of its size, whether it be in your personal or professional life, we have all managed a project. Given that, I have great confidence in saying we've all felt like this at one stage. The stress of project management. Many projects have to cope with changes in demands and scope throughout their life cycle. This is particularly the case in the pharmaceutical industry due to the very nature of clinical trial data reporting. How often have we heard the phrase, the scope has changed? Essentially, do more. Then the budget is cut. Do more with less. The timelines move forward, just for good measure. Do more with less and do it faster. Add in other projects, going through similar scenarios, and competing for the same resources, and we end up looking a little like this again. However, there are ways to mitigate the impact of the circumstances discussed. At Roche, we have adopted a resource model that utilizes core and flexible resources in different manners. There are many benefits in centralizing a team of flexible resources. Neeraj and I hope to spend the next 15 to 20 minutes talking through this in more detail. We will be covering all of these areas. Neeraj will join the presentation and present from the How the Model Works stage. So, what instigated a change within Roche? In the current environment, programming departments are required to churn out deliverables at an ever-increasing pace. Key customers and stakeholders want their data quicker, cheaper, and to better quality. Historically, we used a reactive process rather than proactive. We were firefighting. We had some major filings approaching, so there was a recognition and realization within the department that we needed to become more effective in how we resource. There was a broad range of skill sets not being used effectively. Quite often, colleagues with strong key or specialist skills were only being used by the projects they were assigned to. In essence, they were being ring-fenced, and it always felt like the project needs were greater than the resources available. So, what options did we explore? We had three key options: increasing CRO usage, increasing low-cost partner usage, to utilize a different internal resourcing model. Some of the advantages are displayed on the screen. The CRO and low-cost partner provided us with a large talent pool and flexibility in meeting peak resource needs. The different resourcing model provided us with the luxury of on-site management and working with tried and tested programmers. The disadvantages for CRO and low-cost partner are displayed on the presentation. In the interest of time, I won't go through them individually. However, please note the disadvantages for flexible resourcing model listed here were considered during the formulation stage. Disadvantages as a result of implementing this are discussed later in the presentation. That will give you an indication of which model we chose. We decided to continue as before with CRO and low-cost partners. However, we decided to change the way in which we utilize the in-house resources. The diagram on the left shows the concept of the centralized resource team, whereby all project teams can access and tap into the resource. The diagram on the right is a more realistic representation, as not all projects will require an equal slice of the pie. And in some cases, for example Project 2, they will not require any resource. It is important to highlight at this stage that we have data for the primary and secondary skill set of individuals sitting in the resource pool. Here you can see some of the skill sets listed. If applicable, the resource will be assigned based on skill set. I am now going to pass you over to Neeraj to talk through the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, James. So how would this model work? Initially, we approached this model with a planned notice of at least 6 weeks. So, from the beginning, where a project manager would request resource, all the way through to production work beginning, it would take 6 weeks. But in reality, the true need for flexible resource only arises with immediate changes in remit, and that's usually less than 3 weeks and sometimes just a couple of days notice. I'm sure you'll all agree. We felt that if we assign the resource pool members all the access by default and set a high expectation from our contractors to hit the ground running, we could reduce this lead time to less than 3 weeks, and in some cases just a couple of days. Just like any new approach, there were some perceived disadvantages. Some of the disadvantages are on the screen right now. The model wasn't perfect, but the good news was that the disadvantages were not showstoppers. For example, familiarization phase for complex tasks. We mitigated this by trying to avoid this where possible. We tried to assign resource to studies where they had previously worked, tried to assign this resource to tasks they were previously familiar with, and hence producing a resource based on project experience and skill set. We made our documentation more standardized so it was easy to move from one project to another. Contractor concern at not being assigned to long-term activity. Long-term activity doesn't bring the variety of work with it, and some people prefer one over the other. So by having regular meetings with the resource pool manager, we could ensure that the contractor's concern at not being assigned to a long-term activity was alleviated. Non-exclusivity of a resource. This has been a contentious subject amongst a lot of the project managers because they were no longer responsible and no longer could ring-fence their resource. It took some time to get used to, but by planning our work more and by ensuring we had easy to understand documents, this disadvantage was taken care of to a certain extent. But I will touch on this a little bit later. Advantages. So the reason we're using this model is because it's got more advantages than disadvantages. I'll just go through some of them now. Enforces better planning. One of the advantages of this model is it does make us think about a resource and make us plan our resource a lot better. Because as a project programmer, we know that the length of time we have some of our resource is finite. We can no longer ring fence our resource. So it almost forces the project managers to plan better. Perhaps not the best approach to take to ensure better planning, but it seems to have worked. We are now better at planning our resource. So what happens if we plan our resource better? There's more transparency in the free time, and the skills are readily available to all projects, not just ours. Perhaps one of the main reasons we wanted to use this flexible resourcing model was to manage our peaks and troughs. We had a feeling that this would work to manage our local site peaks and troughs, but over time we discovered it works on a global level too. We have now been getting requests from other sites to use our resource pool to fill the gaps for their resource troughs. Core team career development. As there is now one core team, the core team members now get to work through the entire length of a study. This gives the programmers more visibility with our vendors, customers and other stakeholders. The single point of contact will always be the core team. Knowledge sharing. As the resource is now moving from one team to another, We set an expectation from our contractors to take the good habits from one project to another too. Moving resource means more movement of information, which in turn means better knowledge sharing. This expectation to highlight shortcomings in the way some teams operate and use their feedback to bring efficient consistency across study teams has been working really well. There's now less of "this is how we do it on this project" approach. Everyone is doing things more standardly. There's more rounded contractor feedback. Originally, one contractor would be assigned to one project, so the feedback only came from that one project manager. But as the contractors are now working on various projects and they move from one project to another, the feedback now comes from all the project managers who they work with, as opposed to just the one team. This in turn gives a fairer performance review. It's not just advantages to us as project managers or our SPA team as resource, but there's also advantage to the programming stakeholders. Statisticians, clinical scientists, data managers, they have now gotten used to working with a stable core team. There's better relationships. The core team is established up front, so project teams do not face the risk of losing them to other projects or initiatives when there's a peak or trough in the resource. Customers trust key contacts, and the key contacts will remain on the project. So, what is the story so far? The pie chart on the left shows the breakdown of the requests from quarter 1 to quarter 3 in 2010. In total, there were 54 requests for resource from the pool. None of these were pushed back. Now, pushing back a request did not mean that the request just wasn't done. It meant that the resource pool manager worked with the project manager to find alternative solutions. Some of these solutions might have been front-loading the work, perhaps even changing some priorities within the core team, or even using the core team more effectively. 15 of the requests were long-term requests, where resource was needed for a significant period of time, usually 3 months or more. 30 of the requests were short-term requests. Now, these were the kind of requests that the flexible resource pool was originally designed to cater for. This is where resource was only needed for a period of 2 to 3 weeks, where resource would come in, do a job, and go back into the pool. And it was being able to facilitate these requests that meant that this model really worked. So what was the feedback from the teams? So, forced or otherwise, there was a noticeable improvement in project teams being able to plan, forecast, and be flexible. By taking away an official lead-in time or a transition period for contractors meant that there was a reduction in lead-in time, and this was visible for all projects too. As I mentioned before, there was less ring fencing, or at least this is what the project managers are trying to do. However, it's human nature, we all like to protect our own resource, so there is still room for improvement. What else is happening? Well, we've got 6 contractors now supporting other sites, which means that there's exposure to new therapeutic areas, project tools and processes, and because the 6 contractors are also flexible resource, they can bring this knowledge into our site and go on to other projects and utilize the things that they've learned across other sites. This is a significant achievement. How much of a management time was used for this? As you can see, all this was achieved with just 5% management time. So what's next? Now that the model is up and running, we can look at ways to perhaps enhance the model, maybe even extend it. We know it works the way we wanted it to work, But how about extending the use with permanent employees? Currently only contractors are in the resource pool. This means that they are the ones who are exposed to the variety. If we extended the resource pool to include permanent members of staff, they could also benefit from the variety. For example, if a permanent member of staff wanted to gain experience on perhaps an ESUB activity or maybe even some biomarker work, they could join the pool and work on all ESUB or biomarker related pieces of work. Now this could be achieved by either short secondments in the pool or maybe even a full-time role in the pool. Implementation at a global level. So we know it works locally by populating the resource pool with team members from one site. But could there be a global resource pool? Why not? We work in a global environment, so why should the resource pool just consist of programmers from one site? How about we try having a resource pool which contains resource from all of our sites instead of just one? Now I'll pass you over to James, who will go through the conclusion and close the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Neeraj. To conclude the presentation, this certainly was a novel approach within Roche that came as a result of a need. What we have found is this need has turned into an opportunity. We are evolving as a group and have become better at planning and knowledge sharing. We are now in a position to act on some of the potential enhancements mentioned by Neeraj earlier in this presentation. A supporting paper can be found in the Pharmaceutical Programming Journal, published in December 2010. This concludes the presentation. Thank you for your time.